The registrar of the Hallowed Tonnage Compact had ranked 9,400 warships in his life, and not one of them had ever made him hesitate before he wrote the number down. His name, in the careful syllables of his service, was Oren Set, and his title was Third Registrar of the Outer Accreditation Yard. He stood on the rating gallery of Inspection Station Vale Core, a slow gray ring 300 kilometers wide, built for one purpose and one purpose only. Ships came here to be measured, they came to be rated. And when the rating was carved into the Compact's eternal ledger, every captain in the galaxy would know, to a single decimal, exactly how much that ship was worth. That was the law of the Compact, and it had held for 11,000 years. A warship was not strong because its crew was brave. A warship was strong because it had a number, and the number was higher than yours. Oren Set believed this the way he believed in gravity. He had been raised to believe it. As a child on the cataloging world of Quell Vale, he had learned his numbers before he had learned his own name's full and proper form. His first toy had been a child's rating stylus, a soft, blunt thing that left no mark, and his mother had taught him to point it at the model warships hung from the ceiling of the nursery and say, in a small, solemn voice, what each one was worth. 210 for the cruiser, 400 for the heavy, 660 for the dreadnought, the highest model they made for children, because no child was thought old enough to hold the idea of a class ascendant in their small mind. He had pointed the soft stylus and said the numbers, and the numbers had been true, and the world had made sense. It still made sense, at 51 years into his service. The galaxy was a great spreadsheet, and every ship in it had a cell, and every cell had a value, and the values added up the way they were supposed to. There was a deep and quiet comfort in this that Oren Set had never thought to question, the way a man standing on solid ground never thinks to question whether the ground might decide, one morning, to stop being there. He had no way of knowing that this was the morning. Below the gallery, in the great open bay where the station's measuring fields hummed, the Compact's own flagship hung in proud display. The Sovereign Crown, 2,200 meters of polished black hull, ringed in gold, studded with 440 gun towers that gleamed like teeth in a smile. Its rating was carved above the bay in letters of light. Class Ascendant, tonnage rating 990, the highest number any ship had ever earned in the history of the ledger. The Sovereign Crown was here today for one reason: to impress. There was a particular pleasure in the Compact's pride, and Oren Set felt it now, looking down at the flagship. It was not the crude pleasure of a brute who likes to be feared. It was the refined pleasure of an accountant who likes to be correct. The Sovereign Crown was not merely large. It was large in a way that had been measured, certified, and entered into the eternal ledger, and that certainty was worth more to the Compact than the guns themselves. A frightened enemy might still fight you, but an enemy who had read your number and understood it and done the arithmetic would never fight you, because the arithmetic had already told him how it ended. The Compact did not win wars. It made them pointless before they began. This was, Oren Set had always believed, the highest form of civilization a species could reach. A human ship was coming to be raided. Oren Set had read the file twice. The species called themselves humans. They came from a single wet world on the cold edge of the third spiral arm, a place the Compact's mapmakers had labeled marginal and never visited. They had asked, through 3 layers of polite translation, to bring one of their warships to Vale Core for accreditation. They wanted a number. They wanted to be on the ledger. The Compact had said yes, of course. Everyone wanted a number. That was the whole point of being civilized. But the Compact had said yes for a sharper reason than courtesy. A new species asking to be rated was a new species asking to be ranked, and a species that accepted its rank was a species that knew its place. The Sovereign Crown had been brought to the bay so that the humans, whatever they were, would understand the place they were asking to enter. They would see a real warship. They would see what a real number looked like, and then they would bring their little vessel into the field, and Oren Set would write down something small and honest, and the humans would carry that small, honest number home and learn to be quiet. This was how the Compact welcomed the weak, not with war, with arithmetic. He had done it 1,000 times. He remembered the species called the Tenuvi, who had come to Vale Core 11 years ago with a fleet they were so proud of that they had painted the hulls in their world's colors and flown banners from the gun towers. Their best ship had rated 68. Orenset had carved the 68 into the ledger himself, and he had watched, through the gallery floor, as the news traveled across the Tenuvi fleet, ship to ship, the banners coming down one by one, as each crew understood what 68 meant when the compact's lowest patrol boat rated 90. The Tenuvi had gone home quietly. They had never raised a banner again. Within a decade, their worlds were compact worlds, taken the polite way, with a column and a decimal, and not one shot had been fired, because the arithmetic had made the shots unnecessary. Orenset had not thought of it as cruelty. He had thought of it as kindness. The Tenuvi had been spared a war they could not have won. The ledger had told them the truth, and the truth had saved their lives, even if it had cost them everything else. He believed this. Most of the compact believed this. It was the comfortable, well-worn belief of a civilization that had never once been shown the other half of the ledger, the half that does not fit in a cell, the half that the humans were about to bring into the measuring bay. Orenset checked the time glass on his wrist. The human ship was due to arrive in the measuring bay in 9 minutes. He had already prepared the ledger page. He had already, in the privacy of his own thoughts, guessed the number he would write. Something in the low 40s, he expected. A patrol-weight hull from a young species. 41, perhaps. 43 if they had surprised him. He had ranked 9,400 ships. He was very good at guessing. The first registrar joined him at the gallery rail. Her name was Ulla Vorn, and she was old, older than Orenset, with a rating stylus worn smooth from 60 years of carving numbers into the ledger. She looked down at the sovereign crown with the calm satisfaction of someone admiring a sum that had already been added correctly. "They asked to be rated," she said. "Did you read why?" "They want standing," Orenset said. "Like everyone. They want to be impressed," Ulla Vorn said, and there was a thin smile in her voice. "They have heard of us. They have heard of the ledger. They have heard there is a number that decides who is real, and they have come all this way to receive theirs and be grateful for it." She tapped the rail. "Bring the crown up to full display. Let them see what 990 looks like before they bring their barge into the light. It is a kindness, in its way. It teaches them quickly." Orenset gave the order. Across the bay, the sovereign crown woke. Its 440 gun towers rotated in unison, a wave of polished black and gold rolling along the hull, every barrel rising to salute in perfect, terrifying order. Light ran down its flanks. Its engines flared a deep imperial violet. For a moment the flagship of the hallowed tonnage compact hung in the measuring bay like a god that had agreed, just this once, to be seen. It was the most impressive thing Orenset had ever helped to arrange. He felt the old pride move in him, the pride of a species that had turned strength into mathematics and never lost a war it had bothered to count. Around the great bay, the witnesses watched. That was the other purpose of Vale Core, and the deeper one. Whenever a new species came to be rated, the compact invited observers, delegations from a dozen young races who had themselves been rated and ranked and taught their place, and who were brought here to watch the next one learn the same lesson. There were 9 such delegations in the upper galleries now, behind the clear walls, small huddled shapes from small huddled worlds, and Orenset knew exactly what they had been told to expect. They had been told they would watch a proud new species bring its little ship into the light, receive its small honest number, and go home quiet. They had been brought here to have their own smallness confirmed by watching it happen to someone else. It was an education by humiliation, and the compact considered it merciful, because the alternative was to learn the same lesson at the cost of a war. Orenset glanced up at the watching galleries and felt, as he always did, a faint pity for them, the pity of the rated for the about to be rated. He did not yet know that before the hour was out, every delegation in those galleries would carry home a different lesson entirely, one the compact had never meant to teach, and that the teaching of it would begin in roughly 4 minutes. Then the far doors of the measuring bay began to open, and the human ship came in to be rated. It was not what he expected. It was not large. It was not gleaming. It carried no rows of gun towers rolling in salute, no imperial violet fire, no gold. It was a long gray wedge, scarred and plain, perhaps 1,100 meters from blunt nose to flat stern, with a hull that looked less built than forged, hammered down into a shape that cared about nothing but being hard to break. There were marks along its flanks that the station's scanners could not at first read, until Orenset realized they were not damage. They were names. Thousands of small human names, etched into the metal by hand, packed shoulder to shoulder along 900 meters of hull like a wall of the remembered dead. The ship had a name too, broad across its blunt bow in the angular human script the translators rendered into compact syllables. The quiet verdict. It did not flare its engines. It did not rotate its guns. It came into the measuring bay slow and level and silent, and it stopped exactly where the field markers told it to stop, and it sat there in the light of the Sovereign Crown's 440 saluting barrels and did absolutely nothing at all. Ulla Vorn made a soft sound, almost a laugh. 40, she said. 40 at the most. Write it small. Third Registrar. They have come a long way to learn how small they are. Orenset raised his stylus to the ledger. He did not know, yet, that he was about to spend the worst and most important hour of his 11,000-year-old civilization's history standing exactly where he stood, watching the number he was so sure of refuse to be written. The rating procedure of the hallowed tonnage compact was the same for every ship, from a fuel tender to a flagship, and it had never once failed to produce a number. First, the measuring field would weigh the hull, not its mass alone, but its tonnage of war, a single value the compact's ancestors had spent 4,000 years learning to calculate. Armor, guns, drives, shielding, all of it folded together into one honest figure that told you everything about a ship that mattered. Then the field would test that figure under load. It would push the hull, gently, with calibrated force, and watch how it answered. A strong ship answered loud, a weak ship answered soft, and the registrar wrote the number down. Orenset began the measure. He did it the way he had done it 9,400 times, with the calm economy of long habit. His hands moved across the rating console without his thoughts having to attend them. He set the field aperture to the hull's silhouette. He keyed the calibration to the standard scale. He let the station's measuring engines, which drew on more power than a small world consumed in a year, spin up to their patient working hum. It was a sound he loved, that hum, the sound of certainty being manufactured. In a few seconds it would hand him a number, and the number would be true, and another ship would take its place in the great spreadsheet of the galaxy. The field reached out and closed around the quiet verdict, a soft blue net of force settling over the long gray wedge. On the gallery, the reading glass lit up, ready to show him the human ship's tonnage of war. It showed him nothing, not zero. Zero he would have understood. Zero meant a hull with no weapons, a transport, a hospital ship, a thing that did not fight. The compact rated those two kindly and sent them on their way. This was not zero. This was a blank. The field had closed around the quiet verdict and found nothing it knew how to weigh. Orenset stared at the empty cell on his glass. In 51 years he had seen the field do many strange things. He had seen it choke on hulls built of exotic matter and recover. He had seen it read negative tonnage off a ship that turned out to be a hollow decoy. He had once seen it weigh a derelict at 4 times its true value because the wreck was packed with unstable munitions that the field counted as latent force. But he had never, not once, seen it find a warship and report that there was nothing there to measure. The field did not say there was nothing there. The hull was plainly, physically there, a 1,000-meter wedge sitting in the bay. The field said only that whatever was there did not fit the question the field knew how to ask. Field fault, Ulla Vorn said, frowning at her own glass. Reset it. Orenset reset it. The blue net opened and closed again. Again the glass showed him a blank where a number should be. He looked down at the human ship through the gallery's clear floor. It sat exactly where it had stopped, level and patient, doing nothing. Along its hull, the thousands of small etched names caught the blue light of the measuring field and seemed, for just a moment, to glow. The hull is too primitive to read, Ulla Vorn decided. Her stylus tapped, irritated, against the rail. Some young species build with materials our field was never calibrated for. Wood, stone, cold iron. It is not a mystery, third registrar. It is a backwardness. Increase the field strength. Push harder. A primitive hull answers loud when you push it. That is the only loud thing about it. The compact's field had a scale of force, 1 to 9, and in 11,000 years of raiding ships, it had almost never gone above 3. 3 was enough to make a class ascendant flagship ring like a struck bell. 3 was enough to read the heaviest warship any species had ever brought to Vale Core. Orenset set the field to 3 and pushed the quiet verdict. The blue net tightened. Across the bay for comparison, the Sovereign Crown's hull caught a stray edge of the field and answered instantly, a deep, bright tone rolling through the station, the proud sound of 990 tons of war ringing true. The quiet verdict did not ring. It absorbed the push the way a deep ocean absorbs a thrown stone. There was no tone. There was no answer. The force went into the long gray hull and simply stopped, swallowed somewhere down in the dark of the ship where the field could not follow, and the reading glass stayed blank. Orenset felt the first thread of something he did not have a word for. He had ranked 9,400 ships, and every one of them had answered the field. Loud or soft, proud or ashamed, they all answered. A ship that did not answer was not a primitive ship. It was a ship that had decided not to. The distinction sat in Orenset's mind like a cold stone. In all the language of the compact, in all the 11,000 years of raiding doctrine, there was no procedure for a ship that chose not to be measured. The doctrine assumed cooperation, because cooperation was the price of civilization, and a ship that came to be raided had, by coming, already agreed to be a number. The whole apparatus of the field, the whole science of tonnage, rested on that single buried assumption, the assumption that the ship wanted to be known. No one had ever built a measuring engine for a ship that had crossed the galaxy specifically to refuse. 4, Ulla Vorn said. Her voice had lost its smile. He set the field to 4. He pushed. Nothing. 5. Nothing. The thousands of names along the hull glowed brighter in the deepening blue, and the quiet verdict sat in the middle of the most powerful measuring field in the galaxy, and refused, calmly, to tell anyone how strong it was. It was at field strength 5 that the human transmission came in. It was not loud. It did not demand. It arrived on the open accreditation channel, the same channel every ship used to receive its rating, and it was a single human voice, old and dry and unhurried, speaking in slow, plain words the translators rendered without effort. "This is Gunnery Master Edwin Locke of the warship Quiet Verdict," the voice said. "I understand you're trying to find our number. I'd save yourself the effort. We didn't come here to get one." Ulla Vorn straightened. On the gallery, the junior registrars went very still. "Every ship that comes to Vale Core comes to receive its rating," Ulla Vorn said into the channel, and her voice was the voice of 11,000 years of law. "It is not optional. To be measured is to be civilized. You requested accreditation. You will be rated." "We requested an audience," the dry old voice corrected gently. "Your translators rounded it up. Easy mistake. You hear what you expect to hear. So do we sometimes. We're working on it." "You will be rated," Ulla Vorn repeated. Orenset watched the watching galleries while she said it. The 9 delegations had gone very still behind their clear walls. They had come to see a new species learn its place, and instead they were watching the compact's own first registrar say the same sentence twice, louder the second time, the way a person repeats himself when the first saying has not worked and he has nothing else to reach for. Something was moving in those upper galleries, some small shift of attention, the moment a humiliated audience notices that the one humiliating them has begun, very slightly, to sweat. Orenset had stood in those galleries once, long ago, on the day his own people were raided. He remembered the exact taste of that moment. He had never thought to see it from the other side. "You can try," said Gunnery Master Locke. "You've been trying for 6 minutes. Your field's at 5. You've never taken it past 3 in your whole history, because 3 was always enough to weigh whatever a species was proudest of. So let me save you the climb. You can take it to 9. You can stack every field generator on that station and pour the whole thing into us. And at the end of it, your glass is still going to be blank, and you're still going to be standing there with your stylus in the air, and you're going to have to decide what that means." Orenset looked at the reading glass. It was blank. He looked at his own stylus. It was in the air. "It means your hull is too primitive to register," Ulavorn said. "No," said Locke, and there was no anger in it, only a terrible patience, the patience of a man who has had this argument before and won it every time. "It means your field weighs the wrong thing. You measure tonnage of war, armor and guns and drives, folded into a number. It's a good number. I won't insult it. For most ships, it tells you exactly what you need to know, but it only works on ships that agree to be the sum of their parts." A pause. "We don't." On the gallery rail, Ulavorn's hand had gone white around her stylus. "Every ship is the sum of its parts," she said. "That is not philosophy, that is mathematics. It is the foundation of the ledger. It is the foundation of the compact." "It's a fine foundation," Locke allowed. "I'll grant you that. It built all this. 11,000 years, and not a war you bothered to lose. A galaxy that runs on a number instead of on blood. That's not nothing, Registrar. A lot of species would have killed each other into the dirt before they figured out half of what you figured out. So believe me, I'm not standing in your bay sneering at your ledger. The ledger's a good tool. The trouble with a good tool is that after a while you stop seeing it as a tool. You start seeing it as the shape of the universe. And then one day a thing comes along that the tool can't hold, and instead of saying the tool has a limit, you say the thing isn't real. Every ship is the sum of its parts," she said again, and there was a brittleness in it now. "I know," said Locke. "That's why I came all this way to tell you it isn't true. Seemed only polite to do it in person." There was a quality to the old human's voice that Orenset could not stop listening to. It was not the voice of a warlord. The compact had a long memory of warlords, the loud kind from the burning centuries, the kind who threatened and boasted and demanded, and the compact's whole ledger had been built to make those voices irrelevant, to answer a boast with a number and watch the boast collapse. But Locke did not boast. He did not threaten. He spoke the way a man speaks who has already had the argument 100 times in his own head and is simply reading out the conclusion, patiently, because he thinks you deserve to hear it before the consequences arrive. It was the most unsettling voice Orenset had ever heard come over the accreditation channel, because there was nothing in it to measure, no fear to weigh, no pride to discount, just a flat, worn certainty that the field could not have read if it tried. Orenset, listening, felt the floor of his certainty tilt very slightly, the way a vast ship feels the first degree of a list it cannot yet see the cause of. He looked again at the long gray wedge in the measuring bay. He looked at the thousands of names etched along its hull, and for the first time in his career he found himself wondering not what the number would be, but what the names were for. "Show them the crown," Ulavorn said suddenly, harshly, to the bay control. "Full salute, full display. Run the rating comparison across the open channel. Let this gunnery master see, side by side, what a real number is and what a blank glass is. He wants to talk philosophy. Show him 990. The sovereign crown woke fully. It was, Orenset would remember for the rest of his life, magnificent. 440 gun towers rose and locked. The hull blazed gold. The engines threw a wall of imperial violet light across the bay, and the comparison glass lit up in letters tall enough to read from any window in the station. Class Ascendant, tonnage rating 990, the highest number in 11,000 years. In the upper galleries, the 9 delegations stirred. This was the part of the ceremony they understood. This was the lesson they had been brought to relearn, the great gold weight of the compact's pride unfolding in front of them. And for a moment, the old order reasserted itself in the bay, the order in which there was a biggest number, and the biggest number was here, and everyone else arranged themselves beneath it. Orenset felt the relief of it, the comfort of the familiar shape returning. Surely now the human ship would understand. Surely now, beside that wall of gold and violet, the long gray wedge would look as small as it truly was, and the old man would stop talking, and the morning would right itself, and the glass would find its number, and the universe would go back to being a spreadsheet. And beside it, where the quiet verdict's rating should have appeared, the glass showed a single blank space, and beneath the blank, because the system had to print something, the automatic accreditation routine printed its only word for a ship it could not weigh: unrated. Ulla Vorn allowed herself, at last, the laugh she had been holding. "There," she said into the channel. "There it is, Gunnery Master. 990. And beside it, your ship, unrated. Do you see? Do you understand now what you brought into our house? You brought a ship with no number into a galaxy where the number is everything. You are not even on the ledger. By our law you do not exist." There was a silence on the channel. Then Gunnery Master Locke laughed too. It was a quiet sound, low and worn, and entirely without cruelty, the laugh of an old man at a joke he has been carrying for a very long time. "Unrated," he said. "Yes, that's about right. That's exactly what we are." A pause. "Let me tell you a story, since we've got a minute and your field's still climbing. Long time ago, before any of us were born, a smaller and angrier galaxy than yours decided humanity needed a number too. Decided we were the sum of our parts, counted up our hulls and our guns and our worlds, folded it all into one honest figure, and the figure was small, and they were right. The figure was small, and they came to collect what a small figure is owed." "And?" said Ulla Vorn. "And it took them a while to come," Locke went on, "in no hurry at all, the way a man tells a story he has earned the right to tell slowly. They were patient about it. That was the worst part looking back. They weren't cruel. Cruel we could have hated cleanly. They were reasonable. They came with a number that proved we couldn't win, and they laid the number in front of us, and they said, 'Surrender now and we'll be gentle, because the math is done and you've lost, you just haven't finished losing yet.' They believed they were being kind. I think some of them genuinely were. They thought they were sparing us." A pause, and we looked at the number, and the number was right, and we surrendered. The bay went quiet. "You surrendered," Ulla Vorn repeated, and there was a hunger in it now, the hunger of a system that wanted very badly for the story to end the way its arithmetic promised. "We did," said Locke. "First time. We did the math, same as they did, and the math said kneel, so we knelt, and they took what they came for, the polite way, with terms and a timeline, and then we went home, and we sat in the quiet, and we thought about it for a long time. And somewhere in that quiet, a great many of us, all at once, came to the same small idea. We thought, the number is right. We checked it ourselves. The number is right, and we cannot win. And then we thought, and what if winning was never the question? And," said Ulla Vorn again, almost a whisper. "And we're still here," said Locke. "And they aren't. And the difference between those two facts is the thing your field can't weigh. We learned something out there in the cold, Registrar, something it cost us 900,000 names to learn, and we wrote every one of those names on this hull so we'd never spend it cheaply again. We learned that a warship isn't a number. A warship is a promise. And you can't measure a promise. You can only find out, the hard way, whether it gets kept." Ulla Vorn did not answer him. She could not. She had built her 60 years on the certainty that the number was the truth, and a man had just told her, calmly, over the accreditation channel, that the truth was a thing her instruments had never once been pointed at. So she did what people do when their foundation cracks, and they are not yet ready to fall. She reached for the procedure. "Take the field to 6, she said. Arenset hesitated. 6. In 11,000 years, the field had been taken to 6 exactly once. in a test, on an empty bay, to see whether the station could survive it. It could, barely. The engines had run hot for a month afterward, and the doctrine had been amended to forbid it on a live hull, because no hull the compact had ever rated could survive being pushed at 6, and there was no reason to push a hull harder than it could bear when all you wanted was a number. "First Registrar," he said carefully, "doctrine forbids 6 on a live hull. We could damage the ship. We came here to rate it, not to break it." "We came here," Ulla Vorn said, and her voice had gone flat and strange, "to put a number on it, and I am going to put a number on it. Take the field to 6. He took the field to 6. The station groaned. Far below the gallery, in the deep rings where the measuring engines lived, power that could have lit 100 worlds poured itself into the blue net around the quiet verdict, and the net blazed so bright that the watching delegations in the upper galleries had to look away. The sovereign crown, hanging nearby, caught the edge of the field and screamed, a long, agonized tone of stressed metal, 990 tons of flagship complaining, at a force that was never meant to touch a living hull. The quiet verdict made no sound at all. It sat in the heart of the most violent field the hallowed tonnage compact had produced in 11,000 years, a force that was making the compact's own flagship scream from across the bay, and it absorbed every joule of it without a tone, without a tremor, without so much as a flicker in the soft glow of the names along its hull. The reading glass stayed blank. The field had nothing to push against. It was like throwing a hammer at the night sky. 6, Locke's dry voice observed, after a moment. "On a live hull. Your doctrine forbids that, I think. You're going to cook your own flagship's seams before you so much as warm ours." A pause. "I'm not telling you to stop, Registrar. You stop when you're ready. I'm just noting, for the record, your ledger keeps so carefully that the only ship you're hurting right now is yours." Across the bay, the sovereign crown's tone climbed higher, and Oren Set saw, on the flagship's status board, the first amber light appear. A stress fault. The proudest hull in the galaxy was beginning, very slightly, to come apart, and the human ship it had been brought to humble had not noticed the field existed. "Field to 5, Oren Set said, and he said it without waiting for the order, because someone had to, and the first registrar had stopped being able to. The net dimmed. The sovereign crown's scream faded to a groan, and then to silence. The amber light winked out. Ulla Vorn stared at the blank glass. Her 60-year stylus hung forgotten in her hand. "It cannot be done," she said. It was not defiance. It was the small, lost voice of someone discovering that a thing they had believed was a law of the universe had only ever been a habit. A ship cannot refuse to be measured. It is not in the nature of a ship. A ship is its tonnage. A ship is what it weighs. "No," said Locke, gently, almost kindly, the way you correct a child who has gotten the right answer to the wrong question. "A ship is what it weighs to someone strong enough to lift it. And you're not. That's the whole secret, Registrar. That's the thing your ledger never wrote down. Your number was never the ship. Your number was always just the most you could lift. And you got so used to lifting everyone that you forgot the difference between a thing that's light and a thing that's simply heavier than your arms." The reading glass was blank. The field was at 5, and Oren Set, third registrar of the outer accreditation yard, found that his stylus was no longer in the air. At some point in the last minute, his hand had lowered it, all the way down, to rest against the empty page where no number would go. Ulla Vorn did not like being unable to write a number. In 60 years of carving the ledger, it had never once happened, and she had built her whole self on the certainty that it never would. So she did what the compact always did when arithmetic failed. She reached for force. "You came here to mock the ledger," she said into the open channel, and her voice had gone cold and flat, the voice of law deciding to stop asking. "You came to a compact accreditation yard, you refused the rating, and you stood your ship in our measuring bay and lectured us on promises. Very well, gunnery master. Let me explain the part of the law you skipped. A ship that refuses to be rated is not a civilized ship. It is an unknown weapon in a compact yard. And the law for an unknown weapon is the same as it has been for 11,000 years. It is escorted out, or it is removed. She gave the order without waiting for an answer. Orenset's hand moved toward his console before he understood why. Some part of him, some 51-year instinct, trained on the measuring of ships rather than the killing of them, wanted to object, wanted to say that they had not finished, that the field had not failed so much as encountered something it was never built for, that you did not destroy a thing simply because your instrument could not weigh it. But the protest died in his throat, because it was not his place, and because the first registrar's order was lawful, and because beneath those reasons lay the older and uglier truth that Orenset did not, in that moment, want to look at. The truth was that a part of him wanted the ship destroyed too, not out of cruelty, out of relief. If the ship were destroyed, then the blank on the glass would not have to mean anything. The universe could go back to being a spreadsheet. A thing you could not measure was a frightening thing. A thing you had measured into vapor was simply a thing you had been right about all along. The Sovereign Crown moved. 2,200 meters of class ascendant flagship turned in the bay with the slow imperial grace of the highest number in the galaxy, and its 440 gun towers, which had risen to salute, now lowered to aim. They tracked across the bay and settled on the long gray wedge of the quiet verdict, 440 barrels finding their mark, with the practiced ease of a fleet that had never in its history pointed its guns at anything that survived being pointed at. Orenset's breath caught. He had helped arrange a welcome. He had not expected to watch a killing. "Stand down your hull and accept escort," Ulavorn told the human ship, "or the Sovereign Crown will demonstrate, for the education of every young species watching this channel, exactly what 990 is for." Across the channel, Gunnery Master Locke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in that same dry, unhurried voice, "You want to demonstrate. All right, I won't stop you. A demonstration's a fair thing, but do me one courtesy first, Registrar. Before you fire, take your field off us. You've got it at 5. I'd hate for you to think, afterward, that whatever happens, happened because we were held still. Let go of the ship, let it stand on its own, and then show the young species what 990 does to a hull that won't give you a number." Ulavorn hesitated. Orenset saw it. The request was wrong somehow, too willing, a man inviting the blow, but pride is a kind of field too, and it had her by the throat. And there was the audience. That was the thing Orenset saw, and Ulavorn could not let herself see. 9 delegations watched from the upper galleries, 9 young species who had been rated and ranked and taught their place, and who were now watching the compact certainty wobble in real time. If the first registrar held the field and fired, and the human ship died held and helpless, the watching species would always wonder. They would go home and say, "The compact destroyed the human ship, yes, but it destroyed it while it was pinned, and it could not weigh it first, and what does that mean?" The doubt would travel. The doubt was already traveling, and so when the human asked her to let the ship go before she fired, Ulavorn could not refuse, because to refuse was to admit, in front of 9 watching worlds, that the compact was afraid of a ship it could not measure. "Release the field," she ordered. The blue net let go of the quiet verdict. For one heartbeat the human ship stood entirely alone in the measuring bay, unheld, unmeasured, unrated, a long gray wedge covered in the names of the dead, and 440 compact guns aimed at it from the proudest warship in 11,000 years of history. "Whenever you're ready," said Gunnery Master Locke. The Sovereign Crown fired. Orenset had seen the flagship fire before, in exercises, against drone hulls and ranging targets. He knew what 440 class ascendant guns looked like when they spoke together. It was the single most violent thing his civilization could produce, a wall of directed force that had ended 3 wars before they started, simply by being demonstrated, and it crossed the bay toward the quiet verdict in a sheet of imperial violet fire that lit the whole station like a second sun. It struck the long gray hull, and the long gray hull was not there. That was the only way Orenset could ever describe it afterward, to the inquiry, to his own children, to himself in the long nights that followed. The fire struck where the quiet verdict had been, and the quiet verdict had moved, not far, not fast, just enough, sliding aside through the space the guns had aimed at, with an economy so total that it looked less like dodging than like a correction, like a thing stepping out of a hole that had been dug for someone else. 440 barrels worth of Imperial fire poured through empty bay and struck the far measuring wall, and the station shuddered to its bones. Orenset's mind reached for the explanation and could not close its hand around one. He knew, the way every compact officer knew, what should have happened. A ship that size, struck by a full-class ascendant barrage at this range, should have ceased to be a ship. There was no armor in the ledger that survived 990 at point blank. The tonnage doctrine was very clear about it. The doctrine had a formula for exactly this, a clean little equation that took the firing ship's rating and the target's rating and returned, with grim reliability, the number of seconds the target had left. For a ship that rated 40 against a ship that rated 990, the formula returned a number smaller than 1. Less than a second. The human ship should have been gone before the light of its own destruction reached the gallery. The formula had never been wrong. It was wrong now. The quiet verdict had not fired back. It had not even raised a gun. It had simply not been where 990 expected it to be, and that, Orenset understood with a cold falling feeling, was a kind of answer the ledger had no column for. Again, Olavorn said, and her voice cracked on the word. Fire again. It moved. It can be tracked. Fire again. The Sovereign Crown fired again. And again. 440 guns, the highest number in the galaxy, firing as fast as class ascendant towers could cycle, filling the measuring bay with a storm of violet light meant to fill every cubic meter the human ship could possibly occupy. The quiet verdict moved through the storm. It did not race. It did not dazzle. It went where the fire was not, again and again, a long gray wedge sliding through the gaps in a wall of destruction, with the patient precision of a craftsman threading a needle he has threaded 10,000 times. The names on its hull caught the violet light and threw it back in flickers, so that to Orenset, watching from the gallery with his stylus forgotten in his hand, it looked as though the dead written into the metal were watching the guns and deciding, calmly, where the ship should be. And the whole time, on the open channel, Gunnery Master Locke kept talking. "This is the part I came to show you," he said, conversational, as 440 guns tried and failed to find his hull. "Not so you'd be afraid of us. Fear's a small thing. It wears off. I came to show you the mistake in the ledger, because you're not stupid people and somebody ought to tell you while there's still time to fix it." A pause, as the ship slid through another wall of fire. "Your number measures what a ship can do. It does not measure what a ship will not do. And the second thing is bigger than the first. Always has been." In the upper galleries, the 9 delegations had risen from their seats. Orenset saw it from the corner of his vision. 9 huddled groups of small shapes pressed against the clear walls, watching the impossible thing happen below them. He could only guess what they were feeling. He could guess, because 30 years ago he had been one of them, pressed against a clear wall on a day his own people were being made small. And if on that day a single ship had stood in the bay and shrugged off the compact's whole pride without firing back, he knew exactly what it would have done to him. It would have unmade, in 90 seconds, a lesson the compact had spent his whole childhood teaching. It would have told him that the number was not the universe after all, that somewhere out in the dark there was a kind of strength the ledger could not weigh, and that meant his own people might have it too, unmeasured, unrated, waiting. That was the lesson spreading through the upper galleries now, ship by ship, the way the news of 68 had once spread through the Tenuvi fleet. Except this lesson ran the other way. "Hold still," Olavorn whispered. It was not an order anymore. It was a prayer. "We have not fired a shot," Locke went on. "You've noticed that. Your young species watching this channel have noticed it. The most heavily armed ship you've ever failed to rate is sitting in your bay taking everything your flagship has, and it has not fired one round. Why do you think that is? The quiet verdict turned, unhurried, presenting its scarred flank to a barrage that washed over the space beside it. It's not because we can't. I want to be very clear about that, Registrar, because it's the whole lesson. It is not because we can't. It is because we decided, before we ever came here, exactly how much of what we can do you were going to be allowed to see, and the answer was none of it. Your 990 has been firing at us for 90 seconds, and the most dangerous thing on this ship hasn't woken up yet. Orenset looked at the reading glass. It was still blank, but beneath the blank, the automatic routine had updated its single printed word, the way it updated for every ship under live fire, recording the hull's status for the eternal ledger. It no longer said unrated. It said, in the small honest letters the compact used for facts it could not deny, untouched. Orenset read the word 3 times. It was a word the system almost never had cause to print. The status routine had been written 10,000 years ago by ancestors who were thorough to the point of obsession, and they had included a status for a ship that took live fire and bore no damage, because the doctrine demanded completeness. But in 51 years of service, Orenset had seen it printed exactly twice, both times for drone hulls in error. He had never seen it printed for a real ship under a real barrage. He had certainly never seen it printed while a class ascendant flagship was, at that very moment, still firing. The word sat on the glass like an accusation, untouched. Not the ship was failing to be marked. The ship was, in the cold, honest grammar of the ledger itself, untouchable, and the ledger had a word for it, because the ledger, unlike the people who kept it, had never pretended that such a thing could not exist. The Sovereign Crown's guns fell silent, not by order. They had simply run their cycle dry. 440 towers emptied into a measuring bay, and there in the center of the smoke and the cooling violet light stood the quiet verdict, exactly where it had chosen to be, level and patient and entirely unmarked, with the names of 900,000 dead, glowing softly along 900 meters of hull that the proudest number in the galaxy had not managed to scratch. For a long moment, no one on the gallery spoke. The bay was full of cooling smoke and the slow ticking of overstressed gun towers, 440 barrels glowing dull red, spent, emptied into a target they had not touched. And in the center of it the quiet verdict sat exactly as it had begun, level and patient, a 1,000-meter gray wedge that the proudest weapon in the galaxy had failed to mark, and the only light that moved on it was the soft, steady glow of the names. Orenset looked from the unmarked human hull to the Sovereign Crown, and a thought came to him that he could not put down. The flagship had fired everything it had. That was the part the doctrine never accounted for, because in the doctrine you never needed to fire everything. The number did the firing for you. The enemy read the number and surrendered, and the guns stayed cool. But here the guns had spoken, all of them, the full voice of 990, and the speaking had revealed something the number had always hidden. It had revealed the ceiling. The Sovereign Crown could do this, and no more. This was the top of its power, laid bare, spent, emptied into the bay for everyone to see. The number had promised the flagship was unbeatable, and the number had been believed precisely because it had never been tested, and now it had been tested, and the test had shown the whole galaxy exactly where the flagship's strength ran out. The quiet verdict had not shown anyone where its strength ran out. That was the difference, and it was the whole difference. The compact's power was a known quantity, and a known quantity has a top. The human ship's power was a blank, and a blank has no top, because you cannot see the top of a thing you cannot see the bottom of. The Sovereign Crown had just spent 90 seconds proving how strong it was, which is another way of saying it had just spent 90 seconds proving how strong it was not. "You've stopped," Locke observed mildly. "Out already? 440 guns and 90 seconds of fire. That's your demonstration. I watched the whole thing. I'd write it down if I were you, because here's the number that actually matters, the one your ledger should have had a column for all along." A pause, and the dry old voice went, just slightly, harder. "Hits. Landed on the quiet verdict. 0. Shots fired by the quiet verdict. 0. Now ask yourself, Registrar, which of those 2 zeros should frighten you more? Ulla Vorn did not answer. She could not. She stood at the gallery rail with her 60-year stylus, in a hand that had begun, very slightly, to shake, and she looked down at the unmarked gray ship in the ruins of the measuring bay, and Orenset watched the certainty of 11,000 years drain out of her face like water out of a cracked cup. You wanted us on the ledger, Locke said, gentler now. Fine, put us on it, but put us on it honest. Don't write a number, because a number's a lie and you know it now. Write the truth. Write that one human warship came to your proudest yard, let your highest flagship empty itself into it, never moved more than it had to, never fired a single shot, and walked away without a mark. Write that, Registrar, and then go and ask yourselves a question your whole civilization has spent 11,000 years too proud to ask. What question? Ulla Vorn said. It came out of her in a whisper. If that's what we let you see, said Gunnery Master Edwin Locke, what do you suppose we kept hidden? The inquiry began before the smoke had cleared. That was the way of the hallowed tonnage compact. When arithmetic failed, the compact did not panic. It convened. Within the hour, the High Assessor herself, keeper of the eternal ledger and final authority on every number in the galaxy, arrived at Vale Core aboard a courier so fast it had outrun its own escort, and she did not waste time on greetings. Her name was Sethra Quoll, and she had carried the title for 90 years, and she had never once been told that a ship could not be rated. She stood on the rating gallery where Ulla Vorn had stood, and she looked down through the clear floor at the long gray wedge still sitting calm and unmarked in the ruined bay, and she listened in silence to the full recording of the demonstration. 440 guns, 90 seconds, 0 hits, 0 shots fired in return. Sethra Quoll was not a cruel keeper. That was the thing about her that the rest of the compact respected and feared in equal measure. She did not punish failure with rage, she punished it with attention. When a registrar made an error in the ledger, she did not shout. She came, and she sat beside them, and she made them explain, in their own words, exactly how the universe had come to disagree with the number they had written, and the explaining was worse than any shouting, because it forced you to watch your own certainty come apart in your own mouth. Orenset had never been on the receiving end of it. He was about to be. When the recording finished, she turned to him, because Ulla Vorn could no longer speak, and she said one word. Explain. I cannot, High Assessor, Orenset said. It was the most honest thing he had ever said in his service, and it frightened him to say it. The field could not weigh it. The flagship could not strike it. It will not give a number, and it will not give a reason. It only says that a warship is a promise, and that promises cannot be measured. A promise, Sethra Quoll repeated. There was contempt in it, but underneath the contempt, Orenset heard something he had never heard in a High Assessor's voice before. Doubt. We do not rate promises. We rate hulls. Open a channel to this gunnery master. I will rate his hull myself, and I will do it the old way, the way my predecessors rated the warlords of the burning centuries, and we will see how long his philosophy survives a real measure. The channel opened. The dry old human voice came back at once, as though Locke had been waiting. High Assessor, he said. They sent for the one who keeps the book. Good. I was hoping they would. I don't like saying important things to people who can't change the rules. You will not flatter me, Sethra Quoll said. You will answer me. You have refused accreditation, fired upon no one, and made a mockery of a compact yard. I have one question, and your answer decides what happens next. Your ship took 440 guns and was not marked. I want to know how. Not philosophy, the mechanism. Tell me how a hull that size survives a class-ascendant barrage, or I will assume the recording is a deception and rate you as a fraud. It's not a deception, said Locke, and I'll tell you the mechanism because you ask straight, and that deserves a straight answer. But you won't like it because it isn't a thing. You keep looking for a thing, a shield, a field, a trick of armor, something you can put a number on. There isn't one. A pause. The mechanism is that we knew where the shots would go before your gunners did. All 440. Every cycle. We have been watching your fleet for 40 years, High Assessor. We have the firing pattern of every gun tower class the compact builds, the cycle time, the tracking lag, the half-second hitch your ascendant towers make when they reseat. We did not dodge 990. We read it, same as we read your ledger, same as we read your law. We came into your house already knowing the shape of every wall. The gallery had gone silent. Orenset felt the cold falling feeling open under him again, wider now, because this was worse than a weapon you could outbuild. This was a ship that had done its arithmetic on you before it ever arrived. Orenset, listening, felt the cold falling feeling open under him again, wider than before. He thought of the compact's whole way of seeing, the great spreadsheet of the galaxy, the cells and the values and the sums, and he understood for the first time what was wrong with it. The spreadsheet recorded what each ship was. It had no cell for what each ship had been doing while no one was rating it. It assumed a ship was a fixed quantity, a value you could measure once and trust forever. But the quiet verdict had not been a fixed quantity. For 40 years it had been a verb, not a noun. It had been watching and learning and folding the compact's own patterns into itself, and none of that work had ever shown up in a cell, because there was no cell for work, only for weight. The compact had built an instrument that could weigh a stone with perfect precision, and was completely blind to the difference between a stone and a thing that was thinking. 40 years, Sethraquol said slowly. 40 years, Locke agreed. You never noticed, because nothing without a number is real to you, and a single quiet ship at the edge of a system reads as nothing. That's the gap in your whole way of seeing, High Assessor, and I'll name it plainly, because you sent for someone who can fix it. You believe what can be measured is all there is. So you measure a hull and you think you've seen the ship, but the hull is the smallest part. The ship is the 40 years of watching. The ship is the 900,000 names on the metal, and the promise we made over every one of them. The ship is what we will and will not do. None of that fits on your field. And so to your ledger, the deadliest warship that has ever entered this bay reads as blank. Not because it's empty, because your eyes only see numbers, and we left the numbers at home. Then why come at all? Sethraquol demanded, and now the doubt in her voice had nearly swallowed the contempt. If you despise the ledger, why cross the galaxy to stand in our yard? What do you want, human? There was a long pause. When Locke spoke again, the dryness had gone out of his voice, and what was left underneath was older and heavier, the voice of a man speaking for 900,000 of the dead. I'll tell you what we want, he said. We want you to stop, that's all. That's the whole errand. We have watched the hallowed tonnage compact for 40 years, and we have watched what you do to the young species. They come to you to be rated, the way we pretended to. They come hopeful, and you weigh them, and you write a small, honest number, and you send them home knowing exactly how small they are. And then, High Assessor, here is the part your ledger does not record. Once a species knows its number, it never fights you. Why would it? You taught it the arithmetic. 41 against 990. The sum is already done. So the small ones kneel, and you take their worlds the polite way, with a column and a decimal, and you never have to fire a shot, because you conquered them with a measurement before the war could ever start. Orenset heard the words and felt them land somewhere very old in himself, somewhere from before his service, from the nursery on Quell Vale where he had pointed a soft stylus at the model ships and said their numbers. He had been taught that the numbers were a kindness, that to know your place was to be spared the agony of discovering it. And it was true, that teaching, it was almost entirely true, and the almost was the part the human had put his finger on. The teaching spared you the war. It also spared you the chance to find out that you might have been worth more than the war would have cost. It made you small and called the smallness mercy, and because you were small you believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative, which was to spend 900,000 lives proving the number wrong. That is civilization, Sethraquol said, but it came out thin. That is the cruelest weapon I have ever seen, said Locke, and I have seen a great many. You don't break worlds, You break the belief that they're worth defending. You convince a whole young species that its courage is a rounding error. And the worst of it, the thing that brought us all this way, is that it works because it's almost true. The number is almost everything. Tonnage of war is almost the whole story. His voice hardened, final. But almost is the gap we live in, High Assessor. Almost is where the quiet verdict came from. We were the small number once. We did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said kneel. And instead we spent 900,000 lives proving that a promise weighs more than a hull, and we wrote every one of those lives into the metal so we would never forget what almost cost, or what it's worth. On the gallery, Oren Set looked down at the names glowing along the gray hull and understood, finally, what they were. Not decoration, not mourning, a receipt, the exact price of the lesson the human ship had crossed the galaxy to teach. And he understood something else, looking at them, something that the rating doctrine had never had a word for. The compact wrote numbers on its hulls. The tonnage rating, carved in light above the bay, the proud 990 of the sovereign crown. A number told you what a ship could do. The humans wrote names on theirs, and a name did not tell you what a ship could do. A name told you what it would not do. It would not forget. It would not spend cheaply what those names had bought. It would not, having learned at the cost of 900,000 lives that a promise weighs more than a hull, ever again mistake a number for the truth. The names were the promise, written where the crew would see it every day, so that the promise could never quietly become a number while no one was watching. The compact had carved its strength into its hulls and forgotten, over 11,000 years, what the strength was for. The humans had carved their reason into theirs, and the reason was the whole weapon. There was a silence on the gallery, and into it, unexpectedly, a new voice spoke. It came not from the human ship, but from the upper galleries, from one of the 9 watching delegations, broadcast onto the open channel by a hand that was plainly shaking. The translators rendered it small and careful. "We are the Tenuvi," the voice said. Oren Set turned. He knew the name. He had carved their number 11 years ago, 68. He had watched their banners come down. "We were raided," the Tenuvi voice went on, gaining a little strength as it spoke, 11 years ago, in this yard. "We came proud, and we were given a number, and we were told the number was the truth, and we believed it, and we went home, and we lowered our flags and we let the compact take our worlds the polite way, because the arithmetic said we could not win." A pause. "We have spent 11 years believing we were small. We taught our children they were small. We built it into our songs, and we have just watched a single ship take everything the sovereign crown could give and not be marked, and we want to ask the human one question. We want to ask it in front of everyone." "Ask," said Locke. "When the number said you could not win," the Tenuvi voice said, and it was no longer shaking, "and you knelt the first time, the way we knelt, in the quiet afterward, how did you stop believing it?" For a long moment the human did not answer. When he did, his voice had changed, and Oren Set understood that this, more than the High Assessor, more than the field, was the conversation Gunnery Master Edwin Locke had crossed the galaxy to have. "You don't stop believing the number," Locke said, slowly. "The number's true. That's the trap. That's why it works. Because it isn't a lie, it's a true thing pointed at the wrong question. The number tells you whether you can win, and you sit in the quiet, and you check it again, and it's right. You can't win, and as long as you keep asking, can we win, the number owns you." A pause. "What you do is you change the question. You stop asking, can we win? You start asking, what are we willing to spend, and what is it worth, and what will we and won't we do? And the moment you ask those questions instead, the number goes quiet, because the number was never built to answer them. It can't weigh what you're willing to spend. It can't weigh what a thing is worth to you. It can only weigh hulls. And the day you understand that the hull was never the question, that's the day you stop being small. Not because the number changed, because you finally stopped letting it ask for you." But Oren Set, watching the upper galleries, saw something move through all 9 of them at once. A stillness becoming a different kind of stillness. and he knew that whatever the compact had brought these species here to learn, they had just unlearned it, altogether, in a single sentence, and that the unlearning would go home with them to 9 worlds and never be undone. "You came to threaten us," Sethraqual said. "No," said Locke, and the word was iron. "If I'd come to threaten you, you'd know. I came to warn you, which is a different and kinder thing, and I'm doing it the hard way, in person, in your own yard, in front of your own flagship and every young species watching this channel. So watch closely, all of you, because I'm going to say the warning once, and then we're going to leave, and what you do after that is on your ledger, not mine." The quiet verdict moved. For the first time in the whole long hour, it did something other than stand still or slide aside. It turned, slow and deliberate, until its blunt gray bow faced the rating gallery directly, and the 900,000 names along its flank rolled across Orenset's vision like a tide of the remembered dead, and somewhere deep in the hull, for one single instant, something woke. Orenset never saw what it was. No one did. The station's every scanner, the measuring field, the High Assessor's own courier sensors, all of them registered the same impossible reading for exactly 1/4 of a second, and the reading was not a number. It was the blank again, the same blank the field had found when it tried to weigh the hull, except now the blank was enormous. The blank had depth. The blank was a hole punched in the compact's whole way of seeing the universe, and through the hole, every instrument on the station felt for 1/4 of a second the size of the thing the humans had decided not to show. Orenset would try, for years afterward, to find words for what the 1/4 second had felt like, and he would never quite succeed. The closest he ever came was this. He said it had felt like standing at the edge of a calm gray sea, a sea you had measured your whole life from the shore, a sea you had charted and sounded and assigned a depth to, a depth you had written in the ledger and trusted, and then for 1/4 of a second the surface had gone clear, all the way down, and you had seen that the depth you had written was the depth of the first 10 meters, and that beneath the first 10 meters the water went down and down past every number you owned, down past the floor of your imagination, down into a dark that had been there the whole time, directly beneath the calm surface you thought you understood, patient, enormous, and entirely uninterested in your chart. And then the surface had gone gray again, and the sea was just a sea, and you were left standing on the shore knowing that everything you had ever written about it was the truth about the top 10 meters and a lie about everything below. Then it closed. The hull went quiet. The quiet verdict was just a long gray ship again, level and patient, covered in names. But every soul on Veilcore had felt it, and on the comparison glass, where the system had printed untouched, the automatic routine printed its last word of the day, the word it printed only once in 10,000 ratings, for hulls so far beyond the field scale that the compact's ancestors had built a single special term for a thing the ledger could not contain. Immeasurable. The High Assessor of the hallowed tonnage compact stared at the word for a long time. "That is not a rating," she said at last, very quietly. "No," Locke agreed, gentle again now that the warning was delivered. "It's the truth. First true thing your ledgers printed all day. I'd leave it there if I were you. I'd carve it into the book, and I'd show it to every young species that comes to be made small, right next to your 990, and I'd let them draw their own conclusions about which one of those they'd rather be." The High Assessor was silent for the length of 3 slow breaths, and in those 3 breaths, Orenset watched 90 years of certainty finish dying behind her eyes. When she spoke again, she did not speak to the human ship. She spoke to her own gallery, to her own registrars, to the 11,000 years of law standing behind her, in the polished gray of the station. "Bring me the Burning Centuries page," she said. It was a strange order, and Orenset did not understand it until the archive brought up the ancient ledger leaf and laid its light across the gallery wall. The Burning Centuries, the age before the compact, when the species that would become the hallowed tonnage had fought each other across 1,000 worlds with no ledger to tell them who would win, and so they had simply fought, and bled, and learned the slow, ruinous way, exactly how much a war costs when no one has done the arithmetic first. The ledger had been invented to end that age, to make the bleeding unnecessary, to let arithmetic decide the wars that pride would otherwise have fought. For 11,000 years the compact had told itself this was mercy, that the number saved lives, that to be measured and made small was kinder than to be measured and destroyed. And it had been mercy, once. Orenset saw the High Assessor see it. It had been mercy, and then, over 11,000 years, the mercy had curdled, the way mercy does when it is never questioned, until a tool, built to stop the strong from crushing the weak, had become the precise and patient instrument by which the strong crushed the weak, without ever having to call it crushing. He thought of the Tenuvi again, of the banners coming down across their fleet, ship by ship, as the number 68 traveled among them. He had stood on this gallery and watched it, and felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a sum coming out right. He thought of how many other fleets he had watched lower their banners over the years, how many hopeful species he had handed a small honest number and sent home quiet, and how he had called every one of those mornings a mercy. He thought of the children who would be born on those worlds, knowing, before they knew their own names, that their people had a number, and the number was small. He thought of all the courage that had been folded down into a decimal and filed away, never spent, never tested, never given the chance to find out what it might have weighed. And for the first time in 51 years, Third Registrar Orenset felt ashamed of a number he had written, and then ashamed of all of them, an entire career of small honest numbers, each one true, each one a quiet act of theft. "We forgot," Sethraqual said. She was not speaking to Locke. She was barely speaking aloud. The ledger was never meant to decide who was worthy. It was meant to spare us the cost of finding out. And somewhere in 11,000 years we forgot the difference, and we began to believe the number was the worth. She turned, slowly, to the clear floor and the gray ship below, and then a species crossed the galaxy, to stand in our yard and remind us, by letting our highest flagship empty itself into a hull it could not touch, that the cost we thought we'd escaped was only ever postponed. She opened the channel herself. "Gunnery Master Locke, High Assessor, I am going to ask you a question, and I want the same straight answer you have given me all day." A pause. "If we do not stop, if we keep our ledger, and keep weighing the young species, and keep taking their worlds with a decimal and a column, what then? You have shown me what one of your ships will not do. What is it that your ships will do, if we make you?" There was a long quiet on the channel. "High Assessor," Locke said at last, "I have spent this whole hour proving to you that the most important thing about a warship is what it will not do, and now you want me to tell you the other half. I understand why. You can't make a decision without it. So I'll give it to you once, plainly, and then I'll never speak of it again, because the kind of ship that has to threaten you is a ship that's already failed. Tell me." "There are 900 of us," said Gunnery Master Edwin Locke. 900 ships like this one, each one carrying the names of the dead it was built to remember, each one having spent 40 years reading a different corner of your galaxy, each one already knowing the shape of every wall in whatever house it's chosen. You have 200,000 hulls. I know. We counted them the way you count, hull by hull, gun by gun, and we folded it all into one honest number, and the number is very large, and I will tell you the truth about that number, the same way I told you the truth about yours." A pause. "It doesn't matter, because your 200,000 hulls are the sum of their parts, and they will fire where they think we are, and we will not be there, and they will run their guns dry into empty space, the way your flagship did, and at the end of it, there will be 900 ships that have not fired a shot, standing in the wreckage of an arithmetic that was wrong from the first decimal." The gallery did not breathe. The gallery held its silence the way a held breath holds, trembling. Orenset did the arithmetic without meaning to, because arithmetic was the only language his mind had ever been given for fear. 900 human ships, 200,000 compact hulls. The ratio was overwhelming. The ratio was so far in the compact's favor that the old formula, the clean little equation that took 2 ratings and returned the seconds a battle would last, would not even have bothered to run. By every number the compact owned, 900 ships against 200,000 was not a war. It was a rounding error. It was the Tenues 68 all over again, except the small number was the human one, and the compact was the great gold weight that the small number was supposed to kneel before. Except Oren Set had just watched, with his own eyes, what the small number did to the great gold weight when the small number had decided not to be the sum of its parts. He had watched 440 guns empty themselves into a hull they could not touch. And he understood, with a clarity that made his hands go cold, that the ratio meant nothing. 200,000 hulls firing where the enemy was not, running their guns dry into empty space, was not 200,000 hulls. It was 200,000 wrong answers, repeated, to a question the humans had stopped asking 40 years ago. But that is the half I hoped never to say, Locke went on, and the iron softened out of his voice, and what was left was tired, and old, and almost kind. Because here is what I actually came to tell you, High Assessor, the thing underneath the warning. We don't want to. We came 900 ships worth of distance to avoid it. We let you fire on us so you'd know it wasn't fear that stayed our hand. We took your worst and gave you nothing back, not because we couldn't, but so that when this moment came, you would believe me when I said the one thing that matters. A pause. We would rather you stopped on your own. We would rather you looked at that word on your glass, that immeasurable, and understood that it is true of every species you have ever made small, not just us, all of them. The 41 you wrote off this morning. The little hopeful hulls that come to your yard to be told their courage is a rounding error. Every one of them is immeasurable, High Assessor. We are just the only ones who came back to make you print it. Oren Set looked at the word on the glass. Immeasurable. And he thought of the 9,400 ships he had rated in his life, the 9,400 numbers he had carved into the eternal ledger with such certainty, and he wondered, with a grief he had no column for, how many of them had been immeasurable too, and had simply believed the small honest number he had handed them, and gone home, and knelt. "What would you have us do?" Sethraqual said. "Stop weighing worth," said Locke. "Weigh hulls if you like. Tonnage of war is a fine thing to know. Keep your ledger. But strike the line where the number decides who is real, because that line is the cruelest weapon in this galaxy, and you have been firing it at children for 11,000 years without ever once admitting it was loaded. Tell the young species the truth. Tell them the number is almost everything, and that almost is the gap where they live, and that what they will and will not do is theirs alone, and no field will ever measure it, and no flagship will ever take it from them. Tell them that, High Assessor, and you will never have to learn what 900 immeasurable ships will do, because there will be nothing left to make us." The High Assessor of the hallowed tonnage compact stood at the rail for a long, long time. Then she did a thing that had not been done in 11,000 years. She set down her courier reports. She removed, from a case at her belt that had not been opened in the lifetime of anyone present, the High Assessor's stylus, the one used only to set the highest law into the eternal ledger, the one that had carved the foundation line itself 11,000 years ago in the hand of the first keeper. The whole gallery understood what they were seeing before she had taken a single step, and a sound went through the registrars, a low collective intake of breath, because there was no procedure for this, there was no precedent. There was nothing in 11,000 years of doctrine that told them what to do when the keeper of the ledger walked toward the foundation line with the foundation stylus in her hand and a look on her face that said she had finally understood something the rest of them had not yet caught up to. She walked to the great open page where the compact's foundation was written, the line that every registrar in the galaxy carved their numbers beneath, the line that said the worth of a people is the tonnage of its war. She read it once, aloud, slowly, in the old form, the way it was meant to be read. Then she drew the stylus across it, once, slowly, and struck it out. The gallery made a sound Oren Set had never heard a gallery make. It was not protest. It was something closer to a held breath finally released. 11,000 years of it. the sound of a great and proud and tired civilization being given permission, at last, to stop. "Print it again," Sethra Quoll told the archive, and her voice did not shake. "The foundation line, new text, the worth of a people cannot be measured, weigh their hulls, never their worth, and beneath it, the first entry under the new law." She looked down at the gray ship one final time. The warship quiet verdict of the human species. Rating, immeasurable. Disposition, departed in peace, having fired no shot. Note for every registrar who reads this page hereafter. So is everyone else. Go and tell them so. For a moment, nothing in the bay moved. The archive printed the new foundation line in slow letters of light across the gallery wall, and the whole station read it together. 11,000 years of registrars, and the 9 watching delegations, and the 3rd registrar with his blank page, and the words hung there changing everything they touched. The worth of a people cannot be measured, weigh their hulls, never their worth. And then the 9 delegations in the upper galleries did a thing that had no place in any compact ceremony, a thing the doctrine had never imagined and had no rule to forbid. They began, one by one, to make a sound. It was not the same sound from each, because they were 9 different species with 9 different throats, but it carried the same meaning across all of them, and the translators did not need to render it because everyone in the bay understood it at once. It was the sound a people makes when it has just been told, after 11 years or 100 years or 1,000, that it was never as small as it had been taught. It rose through the upper galleries and filled the great ruined bay, and Oren Set, listening, felt his eyes sting in a way they had not since he was a child, pointing a soft stylus at model ships. The Tenuvi were loudest. He could pick their voice out of the 9. 11 years of believing they were 68. 11 years of lowered banners and small songs. And now this sound, this unmeasured noise rising out of a people who had just learned that the number which had owned them was only ever the most the compact could lift. Sethra Quoll let them make the sound. She did not silence it. She stood at the rail and let it wash over her, the keeper of the ledger listening to the consequence of the line she had struck out, and Oren Set saw that she was not afraid of it. She had decided to stop being afraid of it. That, he understood, was what the High Assessor's courage had actually been, not the striking out of one line, the choosing, afterward, to stand and listen to what the line had been holding back. On the channel, Gunnery Master Edwin Locke was quiet for a long moment, listening too. "That's a brave thing to write, High Assessor," he said. "Braver than anything my ship did today. We only had to take a beating. You had to change your mind. I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you the second one's harder." "Will you stay?" she asked. "Will you let us learn from you? There is so much we measured wrong." "No," Locke said gently. "We won't stay. Staying's how it curdles. You'd start measuring yourselves against us, and the number would be small, and we'd be right back where we started, just with the chairs swapped. You don't need us, High Assessor. You needed 1 bad hour and 1 struck-out line, and you've had them both. The rest you do on your own. That's the whole point. That's the only way it ever works." The quiet verdict turned its blunt gray bow toward the far doors of the measuring bay. It had not flared its engines once in the whole long hour, and it did not flare them now. It simply began to move, slow and level and patient, out through the ruined bay where 440 guns had failed to mark it, past the sovereign crown hanging dark and quiet and humbled in the place where it had come to impress, and the 900,000 names along its hull caught the last of the gallery light and glowed, all together like a sky of small, steady stars. At the doors the dry old voice came back one final time, on the open channel, for every young species still listening across the galaxy. "To anyone out there who came to this yard to get a number," said Gunnery Master Edwin Locke, "or who's thinking about it, don't let them make you small. The number's almost everything, and almost is where you live, and what you do with that is nobody's to measure but yours. We found that out the hard way, and it cost us every name on this hull. Take it from us for free. You're immeasurable. Act like it." And the quiet verdict passed through the doors and was gone, out into the dark of the 3rd spiral arm, leaving behind a ruined measuring bay, a humbled flagship, a struck-out foundation line, and a word glowing on the eternal ledger that the hallowed tonnage compact would carry, changed, for the next 11,000 years. Orenset, third registrar of the outer accreditation yard, looked down at the empty bay where the gray ship had been. His stylus was still in his hand. The page in front of him was still blank, the page he had been so certain, an hour ago, he would fill with a small, honest 41. He thought about all the ships he would rate after today. The young ones, the hopeful ones, the little hulls that would come to Vale Core believing the number was the truth. He looked at the blank page a moment longer, and he found, looking at it, that he was not sorry it was blank. For 51 years a blank page had been a failure to him, a thing to be filled, a question to be answered with a number. Now he saw it differently. The blank was not the absence of the truth. The blank was the truth, the first honest thing the page had ever shown him, the shape of a thing too large to fit in a cell. He thought of all the pages he had filled, all the small honest numbers, and he understood that every one of them had been a smaller lie than the blank in front of him, because every one of them had pretended to be complete, and the blank pretended nothing. The blank simply said, "This is more than I can hold," and left the rest to honesty. Then, very carefully, in small, honest letters, he wrote the first word of the new law at the top of it, so that he would see it every time he sat down to measure a ship for the rest of his life. Immeasurable. He would write it many more times, in the years that came. He would write it for the Tenuvi, when they returned to Vale Core, to have their old number struck out and replaced. He would write it for 100 young species who came to the yard hopeful and afraid, and he would watch their faces change when the field found the blank and the glass printed the word, and he would watch them go home, not small, but unmeasured, which is a different thing to carry, a heavier and a freer thing. He would train younger registrars, and the first thing he would teach them, before the field, before the scale, before any of the old arithmetic, was the lesson a gray ship covered in names had taught him in one ruined hour. The number is almost everything, and almost is where everyone lives. And your job is not to tell a people how small they are, your job is to weigh their hulls honestly, and then to hand them back the blank, and let them spend their lives finding out what it was worth. And far out in the cold dark of the third spiral arm, a long gray warship covered in the names of the dead sailed home, having fired no shot, having lost no soul, having walked into the proudest yard in the galaxy, and walked out again, having changed not a single hull, but 11,000 years of how a civilization decided who was real. The Compact had wanted to impress the humans with their battleships. They had succeeded only in learning, the hard and lasting way, exactly what one human warship would and would not do, and that the second thing was always the larger of the two.